Okay, I'm back. I pressed the play button or the record button accident last time. Okay. Chapter 5. Oh, wait. God damn it, I forgot that Vogon Yeltz is like actually a character for like the later on. Alright. Prostetnik Vogon Yeltz was not a pleasant sight. Oh, sorry. Chapter 5. Prostetnik Vogon Yeltz was not a pleasant sight, even for other Vogons. His highly domed nose rose high above his small, piggy forehead. His dark green, rubbery skin was thick enough for him to play the game of Vogon civil service politics, and play it well, and waterproof enough for him to survive indefinitely at sea depths up to 1,000 feet with no ill effects. Not that he ever went swimming, of course. His busy schedule wouldn't allow it. He was the way he was because billions of years ago, when the Vogons first crawled out of the sluggish primeval seas of the Vogosphere, they had lain panting and heaving on the planet's virgin shores. When the first rays of the bright young Vogue-soul sun had shone across them that morning, it was as if the forces of evolution had simply given up on them there and then, had turned aside in disgust and written them off as an ugly and unfortunate mistake. They never evolved again. They should never have survived. The fact that they did is some kind of tribute to the thick-willed, slug-brained stubbornness of these creatures. Evolution, they said to themselves. Who needs it? And what nature refused to do for them, they simply did, what nature refused to do for them, they simply did without, until such time as they were able to rectify the grosser anatomical inconveniences with surgery. Meanwhile, the natural forces on the planet Vogosphere had been working overtime to make up for their earlier blunder. They brought forth scintillating, jeweled, scuttling crabs, which the Vogons ate, smashing their shells with iron mallets. Tall, aspiring trees of breathtaking slenderness and color, which the Vogons cut down and burnt the crab meat with. Elegant gazelle-like creatures with silken coats and dewy eyes, which the Vogons would catch and sit on. They were no use as transport, because their backs would snap instantly. But the Vogons sat on them anyway. Thus, the planet Vogosphere whiled away the unhappy millennia until the Vogons suddenly discovered the principles of interstellar travel. Within a few short Vogue years, every last Vogon had migrated to the Megabrantis cluster, the political hub of the galaxy, and now formed the immensely powerful backbone of the galactic civil service. They have attempted to acquire learning, they have attempted to acquire style and social grace, but in most respects the modern Vogon is little different from his primitive forebears. Every year they import 27,000 scintillating, jeweled, scuttling crabs from their native planet and while away a happy drunken night smashing them to bits with iron mallets. Prostetnik Vogon Yeltz was a fairly typical Vogon, and that he was also thoroughly vile. Also, he did not like hitchhikers. Somewhere in a small dark cabin, buried deep in the intestines of Prostetnik Vogon Yeltz's flagship, a small match flared nervously. The owner of the match was not a Vogon, but he knew all about them, and he was right to be nervous. His name was Ford Prefect. Ford Prefect's original name is only pronounceable in an obscure Betelgeusian dialect, now virtually extinct since the great collapsing Hrung disaster of Gaul Cid year 03758, which wiped out all of the old Praxabeetle communities on Betelgeuse 7. Ford's father was the only man on the entire planet to survive the great collapsing Hrung disaster by an extraordinary coincidence that he was never able to satisfactorily explain. The whole episode is shrouded in deep mystery. In fact, no one ever knew what a Hrung was, nor why it had chosen to collapse on Betelgeuse 7 particularly. Ford's father, magnanimously waving aside the clouds of suspicion that had inevitably settled about him, came to live on Betelgeuse 5, where he both fathered and uncled Ford. In memory of his now dead race, he christened him in the ancient Praxabeetle tongue. Because Ford never learned to say his original name, his father eventually died of shame, which is still a terminal disease in some parts of the galaxy. The other kids at school nicknamed him Ix, which in the language of Betelgeuse 5 translates as boy who is not able satisfactorily to explain what a Hrung is, nor why it should choose to collapse on Betelgeuse 7. Anyway, the owner of the match was not a Vogon. but he knew all about them and was right to be nervous. His name was Ford Prefect. He looked about the cabin, but could see very little. Strange, monstrous shadows loomed and leaped with the tiny flickering flame, but all was quiet. He breathed a silent thank you to the Dentrassis. The Dentrassis are an unruly tribe of gormans, a wild but pleasant bunch whom the Vogons had recently taken to employing as catering staff on their long-haul fleets, on the strict understanding that they kept to themselves, and very much to themselves. This suited the Dentrassis fine, because they loved Vogon money, which is one of the hardest currencies in space, but loathed the Vogons themselves. The only sort of a Vogon that a Dentrassis liked to see was an annoyed one. It was because of this tiny piece of information that Ford Prefect was not now a whiff of hydrogen, ozone, and carbon monoxide. He heard a slight groan. By the light of a match, he saw a heavy shape moving slightly on the floor. Quickly, he shook the match out, reached in his pocket, found what he was looking for, and took it out. He ripped it open and shook it. He crouched on the floor. The shape moved again. Ford Prefect said, "I've got some peanuts." Arthur Dent moved, groaned again, muttering incoherently. "Here, have some," urged Ford, shaking the packet again. "If you've never been through a matter transference beam before, you've probably lost some salt and protein. The beer you had should have cushioned your system a bit." "Whoa," said Arthur Dent. He opened his eyes. "It's dark," he said. "Yes," said Ford Prefect. "It's dark." "No light," said Arthur Dent. Dark. No light." One of the things Ford Prefect had always found hardest to understand about humans was their habit of continually stating and repeating the very, very obvious, as in, "It's a nice day," or "You are very tall," or "Oh dear, you seem to have fallen down a 30-foot well. Are you all right?" At first, Ford had formed a theory to account for this strange behavior. If human beings don't keep exercising their lips, he thought, their mouths probably seize up. After a few months' consideration and observation, he abandoned this theory in favor of a new one. If they don't keep exercising their lips, he thought, their brains start working. After a while, he abandoned this one as well, as being obstructively cynical, and decided he quite liked human beings after all, but he always remained desperately worried about the terrible number of things they didn't know about. "Yes," he agreed with Arthur. "No light." He helped Arthur to some peanuts. "How do you feel?" he asked him. "Like a military academy," said Arthur. "Oh, bits of me keep on passing out." Ford stared at him blankly in the darkness. "If I asked you where the hell we were," said Arthur weakly, "would I regret it?" Ford stood up. "We're safe," he said. "Oh, good," said Arthur. "We're in a small galley cabin," said Ford, "in one of the spaceships of the Vogons constructor fleet." "Ah," said Arthur. "This is obviously some strange usage of the word safe that I was not previously aware of." Ford struck another match to help him search for a light switch. Monstrous shadows leaped and loomed again. Arthur struggled to his feet and hugged himself apprehensively. Hideous alien shapes seemed to throng about him. The air was thick with musty smells which sidled into his lungs without identifying themselves, and a low, irritating hum kept his brain from focusing. How did we get here?" he asked, shivering slightly. "We hitched a lift," said Ford. "Excuse me?" said Arthur. Are you trying to tell me that we just stuck out our thumbs and some green bug-eyed monster stuck his head out and said, 'Hi, fellas, hop right in. I can take you as far as the Basing-Stroke roundabout.'" "Well," said Ford, "the thumb is an electronic sub-ether signaling device. The roundabout's at Barnard Star 6 light-years away, but otherwise, that's more or less right." "And the bug-eyed monster?" "Is green, yeah." "Fine," said Arthur. "When can I go home?" "You can't," said Ford Prefect, and found the light switch. "Shade your eyes," he said, and turned it on. Even Ford was surprised. "Good grief," said Arthur. "Is this really the interior of a flying saucer?"